Okay, morning all, Shavua Tov. We are back in Shmuel Aleph. We are describing a story which is less familiar to us than other stories. The story of what happened to David after he ran away from Shaul after the departure, the emotional departure with Jonathan. We are in chapter 21. I'll put it straight on the screen and we'll just recap very briefly what we did last week and carry on from there. There we go. Right, so I'll just expand the screen a bit there. Right, so and he arose and went away, and Jonathan came to the city. And he came to Nov, a place called Nov. And I showed you last week on the map that it was only 1.8 kilometers away from Givat Shaul, which is where the whole Rosh Chodesh feast that David had failed to attend, if you recall, that was taking place. So it wasn't much of a running away. He seemed to run away to a very near place. And we established, didn't we, that Nov was the place where the Mishkan was held at that time. How did we know that? We know it because Acimelech, the priest, was there. And of course, David had run to Nov because he was fleeing the king's wrath, and he was fleeing to the Mishkan because that is a place of refuge. What else do we call a place of refuge in English? Thank you, Philip. Yes, a sanctuary, a place of sanctuary. And of course, what else is the sanctuary? Is the Mishkan. The Mishkan. So it's the word sanctuary, meaning a place of safety in English, actually derives from the fact that when you were on the run, you could take refuge or sanctuary in the sanctuary. That's why it's called taking sanctuary, because you would take refuge in the sanctuary and theoretically, at least, whilst you were holding on to the horns of the altar, you were not allowed to, your pursuers were not allowed to take you. That would be sacrilege to take somebody away from clinging onto the altar. They were clinging onto the altar for safety. And that is where the English word sanctuary comes from. It's a place of safety. A sanctuary is a place of safety, which is based on the fact that when you were in the temple, whether it was the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash or whatever other Goyish temple that you had, it was a place of refuge, a place.
Comes from the Latin word sanctus, holy.
Yes, it's the same thing. It's the same. Yeah. The same root of the word is that, but the reason in English that taking sanctuary means taking refuge is because you took refuge in the sanctuary. I just wanted to point that bit of linguistics out for Michael. Is he there, Anita? Is Michael there? Oh, he'll watch the recording. Okay. Hello, Michael. Right. That was especially for you, that little bit of language. Right. So he came to Nov, where the Mishkan was, presumably to take sanctuary. And he does not behave very nicely towards Acimelech. We did this last week. He tells him a bunch of lies, saying that he's on urgent king's business, and that's why he hasn't got any men with him. He's on a secret mission for the king, and he asks him for bread. Acimelech says, the only bread I've got is holy bread, and you can't have that because your men, who of course didn't exist, they only existed in David's lies. David said he had a whole bunch of men who'd gone off to a hidden secret place. Look in verse 3. The Na'arim, the lads, had gone to this Makom Ploni Almoni, they'd gone to a certain hidden secret place. Of course, they didn't exist. David was on his own. So they weren't necessarily pure, tahor, because they may have been with women. And David says, don't worry about it. The men are pure. You can give me this bread. It's a big problem, of course, because this bread was supposedly the lechem apanim, the shoe breads. And of course, they are only allowed to be eaten by Kohanim. David, of course, is not a Kohen. David is from the tribe of Yehudah, so he can't be a Kohen, and therefore he shouldn't have been having it anyway. We mentioned right at the end of last week's shiur that the Radak says that this was a Korban Todah, which a non-Kohen can eat the bread. That is seriously problematic, because if you look at verse 7, Vayitin lo ha-Kohen Kodesh, ki lo haya sham lechem, ki im lechem apanim. He didn't have any bread except for the showbread. So how the Radak can say it wasn't the lechem apanim, it was bread from the Korban Todah, is a bit difficult, because in verse 7 it says explicitly that it was the lechem apanim. So the Mefarshim all say, apart from the Radak, all say that it was the lechem apanim, and the reason that David could eat it was because of pikuach nefesh. He was so hungry that he was about to die, and that's how the Mefarshim get round this problem of him being a Kohen. Yes, Johnny.
Rabbi Steinsaltz puts a little note on that says it appears that this incident took place on the Shabbat or Shabbat night, as the bread is removed from the table on Shabbat and replaced with fresh bread. So maybe this was like used or left over.
It is, but it's still only allowed to be eaten by the Kohanim.
Oh, okay.
You're right, because if you look in verse 7, the priest gave him the hallowed bread, for there was no bread there except the showbread, which was removed from before the Lord to place warm bread on the day it was taken. So Rav Steinsaltz is telling us that this was probably Motzei Shabbat or Sunday, when the lechem apanim is changed over. But that lechem apanim is not eaten until it's changed over. When it's changed over, the old lechem apanim goes to the Kohanim to eat. Yes, right. Anita.
I just find it strange that his great Chava friend Jonathan didn't even give him any supplies, so he knew he might have to run away.
Oh, Anita, you have hit on something really important there. We will come back to that in due course, because there is a section, I can't remember exactly where I read it now, but there is a section that says just that. I don't want to spoil the story of what's coming up next, but you're not the first person to point that out. We will come back to that. That Jonathan bears some responsibility for what's going to happen next, because he didn't send him away with provisions, and it's a serious question mark over Jonathan at that point. That's a very, very important point. We will come back to it. I don't want to jump to it now because it will spoil the story for those that haven't read on. But you're absolutely right about that point, and we will return to it. So the priest gives him this bread, which he shouldn't really give him because he's not a Kohen, but he gives it him on the basis of pikuach nefesh. Now, the Navi who writes Shmuel Aleph at this point inserts a pasuk which interrupts the story. It's almost like this is the narrator saying an aside. It's an important aside, but it interrupts the story, because just miss out verse 8 for the moment. If we read verse 7 and 9 together, you'll see that verse 9 follows on immediately from verse 7. Verse 7 says, the priest gave him the hallowed bread, for there was no bread there except for the showbread, which was removed from him before the Lord to place warm bread on the day it was taken. And David said to Acimelech, and if there is here in your possession a spear or a sword, he then goes to ask for something else. He's got the bread. He now goes and asks for a weapon. But there's a verse in between that, verse 8, which is this almost like this narrator's aside to the reader, to inform the reader of some sinister situation that's going on here. Look at verse 8. And there was a man of Saul's servants on that day, detained before the Lord. Not sure what that means, detained before the Lord. Let's just stop in the middle of the pasuk.
Lingering, Rabbi Steinsaltz says. It was lingering before the Lord.
Lingering, ne'etzar, from the root of the word is atzor, to stop.
Stop, yeah, means stop.
What is, Philip, what is atzirut?
Constipation.
Yes, not in Hebrew. Atzirut is constipation, because of the obvious. Okay, it's the same root of the word. I thought you might know that one, Philip. Yeah. So, Vasham ish me'avdei Shaul. Now, it's an important thing. This was one of Saul's servants. This guy, and he was there. Ne'etzar lifnei Hashem. He was, for some reason, detained or lingering before Hashem. What does it mean before Hashem? It means he's in the Mishkan. This is another proof that the Mishkan, not that we need a proof because the Lechem Apanim are there, but this is another proof, if we needed it, that the Mishkan is here in Nov, because this man, for whatever reason, is there at the in front of Hashem in the Mishkan. I'm just having a look in the Koren to see if it tells us why he was there.
Sorry, can I interrupt, Johnny?
Yeah.
Rabbi Steinsaltz says he remained there in order to sanctify himself by contemplation and meditation. Okay,
all right. I'm not sure where he gets that from, but fair enough. We've got no other explanation as to why he was there. I would like to suggest to you that maybe he was there doing Shaul's bidding. And, Shaul was a suspicious sort of fellow. Maybe he's placed him there as a stooge, as a mole. I don't know. Anyway, he was there. And we're told...
Well, why would an Edomite be allowed into the Mishkan?
Oh, very good question, Michael. Let's do the end of the pasuk. And his name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's shepherds. Doeg. His name was Doeg. What does Doeg mean?
Oh, the warrior. With an O. He worried.
Yeah, the warrior with an O, not the warrior with an A.
No, but with an O.
The warrior. Doeg means to worry. Lidog means to worry. Ani doeg alech means I worry about you. I worry about you. So this fellow is called Doeg. He's called Doeg. That's his name, and he's described as Ha-Adomi, the Edomite, and we're told that he was the chief of Saul's shepherds. So Michael Krauss asks a very good question and says, what is an Edomite doing in the temple? What is he doing there at all? Who would like to suggest an answer as to what Doeg is doing there?
The Edomites were allies of the Israelites during the whole of the, I think, conquest of the Holy Land by the Bnei Israel, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you just made that up.
No, I didn't. I've read it somewhere. I think the Edomites were somewhere. There's a phrase which talks about the Edomites. That we're
told not to hate the Edomites because they're our brothers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They didn't let us pass over their land.
Correct. They didn't let us pass over their land. I'm not aware of any alliance between Edom and Israel.
But we never fought them. I don't think we fought them.
No, because they wouldn't let us go through, but we decided to go round their land. That was in this week's Parsha. But I'm not aware of any, maybe wrong, but I'm not aware of any treaty between Edom and Israel. Michael's question is a very good question. So what's he doing there?
Well, listen, maybe it's like today. The country here today uses foreign labor also, mainly from the Palestinian territories. Maybe it was the same thing.
Okay, I think that's possibly a partial answer, in that it's unlikely that the Ha'adomi means the Edomite non-Jew, because what would he be doing in the Mishkan? And so the commentators all ask this question. Michael, you're in good company. And one of the answers that the Radak gives is that he was actually a Jew, but he lived in Edom, or he came from Edom, in the same way as Paul's got his cynical face on there. We haven't seen that for a little while, Paul. I've missed it. So just as we might say, Paul Westbrook, the Brit, you know, if Israelis were talking about Paul, they may say, do you know Paul Westbrook? You know, he's a British person. He comes from London, right? Paul Westbrook, the Londoner, doesn't mean that he's not a Jew. It means he's a Jew that's come from London. So the Radak says that Doeg was in fact a Jew, but he lived in Edom, or he originated from Edom, and that's why he was there in the Mishkan, because he wasn't a non-Jew at all. All the Mefarshim ask you a question, Michael, and they have to come up with an answer. That's the Radak's answer. Other Mefarshim, which I prefer, to be honest, says that he was a convert, and that he was originally an Edomi. Now that fits. It fits with what? Come on, Paul, tell me bring me a proof where we see that somewhere else in Tanakh, where we refer to somebody who's a convert as their original origin. Come on, Barbara's got it.
Ruth Hamoaviyah.
Yeah.
Yes, Ruth Hamoaviyah, Ruth the Moabite. She's referred to Ruth the Moabite long after she has expressed her desire to join the Jewish people and to be part of Naomi's people, and wherever you go, I will go, your God will be my God, etc. After that, she is referred to as Ruth Hamoaviyah. And so I think that Doeg Ha'adomi may well be that idea. We have to have some explanation as to what he's doing, A, in the Mishkan, and B, why would Shaul choose an Edomite, a non-Jew, for such an important job as chief shepherd? More likely, says the Mefarshim, and I'm comfortable with that this was a convert. What the Mefarshim say, which is a bit harsh, is that's why, I'll just let you into a little bit of a spoiler here. Later on, Doeg is going to dob David in to Shaul, and he does not display loyalty to the priests of Nov, and he doesn't display loyalty to David. So the Mefarshim say he was a convert, and you can't trust converts. Bit harsh, but that's part of the Pirush of the Mefarshim. Okay, so well done, Michael. You noticed something that the Mefarshim of yesteryear also mentioned. So this chap.
By the way, it's not harsh. If he's loyal to the king, he's loyal to the king. He's entitled to be loyal to the king, isn't he?
Yeah, but no, you're right. He's entitled to be loyal to the king. But what the Mefarshim say, which I think is harsh, is that the reason that he wasn't bothered about the priests in Nov was because he was a convert. That's what they say. I think that's harsh, and I'm not prepared to denigrate Doeg because he was a convert. I mean, what he did or didn't do, I mean, you could argue his loyalty was to the king, and that's the correct behavior. And I would probably agree with you on that. But they use the fact that they say he was a convert as a sort of as an insult, really. That was the bit that I was referring to as being harsh. Okay, so Doeg the Edomite was there. That's all we're told in verse 8. This is the aside. So we're telling the story of David and Acimelech, the priest, and the bread, and what we're going to do next, which is the sword of Goliath. And the narrator, as it were, says to us in a sort of stage aside, and look who's here. Doeg the Edomite's here. Ooh, they haven't seen him. There he is. So it's almost like this sort of, pantomime person here. Doeg is there. The baddie's there in the background, and David, as it were, does not know he's there. But David does know he's there. He does know he's there.
He's behind you.
Exactly. Yeah, he's behind you. Exactly. I can see you reminiscing there, Johnny. Have you taken your grandchildren to pantomimes?
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful, isn't it? I took my English grandchildren in the December holidays. I took them up to Bolton to see Jack and the Beanstalk. It was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Anyway, so this is Doeg is there. Now, it seems we're not told at this point that David knows he's there, but he does know he's there. And I'm going to show you how we know he's there by just jumping briefly to the next chapter. I won't spoil the entire story, but to say that something terrible happened in the city of Nov. We'll come to it. And in chapter 22, towards the end, David says to Eviatar, Eviatar is somebody we've had before. We had Eviatar in the Gemara Shir as well, didn't we? He was the Kohen, who he was not the Kohen. Yes, he was the Kohen that advised David. David said to Eviatar, look what he says.
We had him laning yesterday as well. We had him laning yesterday as well.
We did. We had him laning Shlishi yesterday, and he did very well indeed. David said to Eviatar, I knew on that day that Doeg the Edomite was there and that he would tell Saul. I brought about the death of every person in your father's household. So David admits, we don't know at this stage. Let's go back to our chapter. We don't know. It seems to be almost like this pantomime aside that Doeg is there. But ultimately, we find out that David knew he was there. Now, if David knew he was there, and he knew he would tell Saul because he was loyal to Saul, then this is a further criticism of David's behavior, because David here was putting Acimelech in a very, very uncomfortable position. He was putting him in a position of having helped an enemy of the king. And as we said earlier on, that is mored b'malchut, that is rebelling against the king, and you are chayav mitah, you are due the death penalty for that. So David was putting Acimelech in a very, very difficult situation, knowing that Doeg was there, and knowing that Doeg was likely to go back to Shaul and say, do you know what that Acimelech did? He gave provisions, and as it seems, a sword, which is what we'll come to in a minute. He gave provisions and arms to your arch enemy. And as you will see, Shaul, not being a man of particular great patience and thinking things through, kicks off big time with Acimelech and the city of Nov, which we will come to in due course.
Hold it, isn't there any some importance in the order in which it happens? Because it says that this Doeg was there after he'd given him the bread, so he might not have realised it until it was too late.
Well, yes, well done, Michael, again. Because you could say, if it stopped there, you could say, David says, ooh, might be in a bit of trouble here. I didn't realise Doeg was here. But now, after he knows that Doeg is here, that's why the Tanakh puts it in right here. Because what David's going to ask next is for arms.
Yeah, but excuse me. David had told him that he was on the king's business. He told Acimelech that. So presumably Doeg heard that as well. So there's no reason that Acimelech shouldn't give food or even arms to David.
No, you're right. You're right. If the king will say, well, Acimelech, I'll let you off because David told you a bunch of lies. But it's clear. This is what the Mephoroshim ask your question, Paul, and the answer that they give, which I think is possibly right. Who am I to say they're right or wrong? I mean, let me change that. I think I possibly understand their answer, in that Acimelech is not. You'll see in a minute. He's not all that keen. He's not all that keen to give David the bread. And he's certainly not all that keen to give David the arms. And the Mephoroshim say that actually Acimelech didn't believe him at all, didn't believe it for a minute. He wasn't buying David's story. Because, and I think Doeg will probably have gone back to Shaul and said, Acimelech knew. He knew what he was doing. He might have been under pressure, but he knew what he was doing. He could have said, no, I'm not getting involved with the king's enemy. You'll have to prove to me that you're on the king's business. So yeah, I think it's a fair point that you make. And as I say, the Mephoroshim ask that question. Their answer is that Acimelech was not naive. He wasn't a fool. All these questions that he asks: why are you on your own? Why have you not got any men with you? He was suspicious. And the next bit that you'll see, he doesn't give the alms willingly. If he really thought that he was on the king's business, he would have given the bread willingly. He'd have said, I haven't got any, I've only got holy bread. Let me run home and get something for you. Is there anything else I can get you? Do you need water? Do you need this? Do you need alms? He's not keen. You'll see when he gets the sword in a minute. He doesn't give it with alacrity. You'll see in a sec. Let's do it right away. So Doeg is the wicked witch here in the pantomime. He's there, going to split on David to Shaul, and David knows it. And nevertheless, I mean, maybe you could say that they argue that this is David's desperation. Despite this, but we'll see in a second what he asks for, what he gets, and what it means. Verse 9, I beg your pardon. And David said to Acimelech, and if there is here in your possession a spear or a sword, for neither my sword nor my weapons have I taken in my hand, for the king's business was urgent. He says, I didn't come with any arms, because I was in such a rush to do the king's bidding, I didn't even have time to get my arms. How long does it take to strap your sword on? He's going. Why didn't the king give him a sword if he's on the king's business? Michael, you're not buying that, are you? No, Michael's not buying that. Nita's not buying it. And you know what? Neither did Acimelech buy it. Even Philip's not buying it. So he says,
he might have been in the field tending the sheep. He was a shepherd, and he didn't have his sword with him when he got the message.
How did he know that? How did he know to go on the king's business? What, he got a text?
No, he got a messenger came to tell him.
So why didn't the messenger bring him a sword then?
Because he thought he had a sword with him.
Oh, Johnny, you're being done the kafstachus. Good for you. Okay, but we're not buying it. And neither was Acimelech, as it turns out. But I want to show you a bit of Hebrew here, which is very interesting, that the Mephoroshim get themselves excited about. And let's see if you can point out to me where the problem is in Pasuk Tet in the Hebrew. Vayomer David la'Achimelech. David says to Achimelech, Ve'in yesh po tachat yadcha chanit o charev. Translated here, and if there is here in your possession a spear or a sword, what's the problem with that? Come on, Barbara, you're good at this one. What's the problem there?
Being a priest, he shouldn't have a sword or a spear.
He doesn't, you're right, but that's not the issue. I'm talking about the language here, the words in the pasuk.
Just a minute.
Why tachat yadcha?
That's an expression. Tachat yadcha means under your control. That's not a problem.
Okay.
It was hidden because the sword was hidden.
We know the sword is. I'm talking about the language, Philip. The word. There's a
Is
word
it
there.
ein yeshpo?
Correct. This word here.
In.
This word here. Let me get rid of that.
We would have said im yeshpo?
There we go. This word here.
The enpo. Yes, it's too much. It's a double negation.
No, Anita's got it. Ve'in. What does ve'in mean?
There's not ein.
Okay, so there are two different explanations given.
Im.
Philip says like Rashi. Rashi says that the nun and the mem are interchangeable, and it should
Is
say.
it a misprint? Could it be a misprint?
Well, that's one suggestion, but it should say, says Rashi, ve'im yesh po, and if. And of course, if you look at the translation, the translation on the screen goes according to Rashi. What's this Steinsaltz translation, Johnny?
Wait a minute. Is there? What is it? 9, wasn't it? Is there here on hand with you a spear or a sword?
And is there? Okay. Does say and is there, or does it say is there not?
No, is there here on hand with you a spear or sword? Is there here with you on hand? Is there here with you on hand? So is there im yesh po? So he goes like Rashi as well. The other Mefarshim, let me just see if I can remember who it was, and let me just find it. Yes, Rashi says it should be im yesh, and Radak says like Anita, that it's from the word ayin. The ayin yesh po, is there not? So like the word ein meaning not, there isn't. So it's just an unusual word. The in is an unusual word. I just wanted to point that out. The commentators disagree as to what it should be, what it means. Rashi says it should be ve'im. It means ve'im, and the nun and the mem are interchangeable. The Radak says should be ve'ayin yesh po. And is there not? The meaning is the same, which is, have you got a sword? So he says here, if you have, do you have a sword or a spear in your hand? Why? Ki gam charbi v'gam keli lo lakachti biyadi, ki hayad v'ramelech nachutz. I never had time to bring my weapons. So, who said that the priest should not have a weapon? Was that you, Philip?
Yes, I did. I said that.
Philip is right. The priest should not have a weapon. There should not be a sword in the Mishkan. Who can tell me how we know that there really should not be a sword in the Beit Mikdash, in the Mishkan? There is a pasuk in the Torah which doesn't say it explicitly, but alludes to it very strongly, that swords and the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash do not go together. Anybody? I will give you a clue. And then I'll show it to you if you don't get it. It comes immediately after the Aseret HaDibrot in Parashat Yitro. The problem is when we have the Aseret HaDibrot, we're concentrating so hard on the Aseret HaDibrot, it finishes, we all like either sit down or, heave a sigh of relief, that's over, or, or contemplating what we've just heard, the great revelation at Sinai, and we don't concentrate on the words that come after the Aseret HaDibrot. Let me show you. It's in chapter 20 of Shemot. There is the 10 commandments. Okay, you can see there, 6 days you shall work. We spoke about that in the shiur yesterday in the Pirkei Avot shiur. There's Shabbat. There's honor your father and your mother. There's lo tirtzach, don't murder, etc., etc. And then it all ends up, you shall not covet your neighbor's house and all that stuff. And that's the end of it. There's the end of the Aseret HaDibrot. And the people said, oh, Moshe, we don't want this. It's too frightening. You speak to Hashem and tell us. And then here we go. Right after that, verse 21.
Yeah.
An altar of earth shall you make for me, and you shall slaughter beside it your burnt offerings, your peace offerings, your sheep and your cattle. Wherever I allow my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. That is telling you about the Bet HaMikdash, the Mishkan.
Yes, because you had Tolat Hashani who split the stones.
And when you make for me an altar of stones, you shall not build them of hewn stones.
Yeah.
Lest you wield your sword upon it and desecrate it. Ki charbacha hinafta aleha vatachal aleha. This is an indication that the sword and the Mishkan do not go together. So Philip was unwittingly correct, a bit like the watch that stops and it's correct twice a day.
Unwittingly?
Was unwittingly correct that there was no sword. There should have been no sword in the Mishkan, because the Torah tells us keep swords away from the holy things like this. So what sword was there? Well, let's go back and have a look. Why was there a sword there? Well, I'll ask you that in a minute. But what was there? The priest says, well, I haven't got a sword, obviously. But what does he say? Vayomer HaKohen, Cherev Goliath Aplishti, Asher Hikita, Be'emek Ha'elah, Hine Hi Luta, Basimla Acharei Ha'ephod. The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you slew in the valley of Elah. Here it is, wrapped in a garment behind the ephod. Stop there. I'm going to come to that in a minute, the next part of the pasuk in a minute. So we have just said that swords and the Mishkan don't go well together. And there is this sword of Goliath there. And it is hidden behind the ephod. It's placed behind the ephod, and it's double hidden because it's wrapped in a garment. And the reason it's wrapped in a garment and hidden behind the ephod is because really it should not be there. What and how do we know? Let's ask this question. How do we know that the spoils of war were often displayed in the temples of the victor? We've done this together. Good few months ago, but we've all done this together. There was an episode we learned which tells us that the spoils of war are taken to the temple of the victors and displayed there as
trophies.
Trophies, that's the word. Thank you, Johnny. As trophies. I can think of two examples. Go on, Paul.
I said Shimshon, they took him to the temple.
Yes, Shimshon, absolutely. That's the first one. Shimshon. Shimshon was taken to the temple of whom? Can you remember? Dagon, correct. Shimshon was taken to the temple of Dagon and displayed there as a trophy with his eyes poked out. And what did he say? Zachreni na. Remember me now, please, Hashem. Give me this one chance to avenge one of my eyes and to bring down the house. That's the original. That's the original source for the expression. He brought down the house. He did bring down the house, literally. Pushed on the pillars, and down came the house. So yes, Shimshon was displayed as a trophy. Another example.
The Aaron.
Very good. Where do we learn that?
It's Pinchas in Eli's son, isn't it? They lost their
Yes, very good. Chapter 5. There it is on the screen for you. Uplishtim, like Paul's on fire today. Uplishtim lakhu et Aaron Elokim, and the Philistines took the ark of God. Vayeviuhu me Even HaEzer. He brought it from Even HaEzer, where it was, Ashdoda, to Ashdod. And what was in Ashdod? And the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it to the house of Dagon and set it up beside Dagon, as if to say, Dagon is the victor, the Aron Hashem, the holy Aron Hashem, which is what they took out to war, has been vanquished. So it was a very common thing that the spoils of war were taken to the temple.
There weren't swords, though. There weren't.
Okay. What was the sword of Goliath? It was, in fact, the spoils of war. What else did they take to the temple, or what else did they take to the back to the city, at least, other than Goliath's sword?
His shield, maybe.
His shield.
His head.
His head.
Yeah.
His head. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. It's in chapter 17. Okay. Let's have a look. So, David, this is all the business here. Okay, here we go. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem. And his weapons he put in his tent. Now,
the temple. There was no temple there.
There was no Jerusalem either. Right? David did not rule over Jerusalem. If you remember, when we spoke about this, we spoke about this being in the future. This was talking about the future. Eventually, David took the head of Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, and his weapons he put in his tent, because those were David's credentials, as it were. Those were his medals. Those are what made him into the person who was going to be eventually the king in Jerusalem. So he brought it to Jerusalem. But where did it go in the meantime? It went to the Mishkan. But it went to the Mishkan on the basis that that's what you do with the spoils of war. However, it was not displayed openly. Let's go back to our chapter. It was not displayed openly because that's not what you do. Swords are not meant to be in the Mishkan. So there's this duality here that we've seen all the way through Shoftim, and a lot of the time in Shmuel Aleph as well, that the Jews were hedging their bets and they worshipped both God, Hashem, and the local customs. And it's very difficult to get away from the local customs. We were discussing this in the halacha this morning after davening. Michael was there. We were discussing Al telech b'chukat goy. Do not walk in the ways of the goyim. We were talking this morning about how you dress and how you, what kind of clothes you wear, and fashion and things like that. In a way, this was a fashion. To display the spoils of war was what you did in those days. It was.
But why did he? So why did he tell him that he had a sword, that particular sword, if he didn't have to? If he was really suspicious of him, he shouldn't have told him in the first place.
Yeah, and that's right, and that's a criticism of Acimelech, and that's what Shaul said to him. That's basically, when we get to it, that's basically what Shaul said. What business have you got going giving him a sword? Why don't you tell him you didn't have one, you Merrill? right? So yeah, you're right, but he didn't. He may have said, well, look, what can I do? I'm a priest, I can't tell lies, right? There was a sword there. And I suppose he's also thinking, well, let's be honest, if anybody deserves this sword, it's got to be David. And he alludes to that. The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you slew in the valley of the Terebinth, well, why does he need to be told that? David jolly well knew who Goliath was. He also knew that he had slain him. He'd also killed him. He also knew where he'd done it. He didn't need to be told that. This is
also a very big sword. It's also a very big sword. I'm surprised David would be able to lift the sword as it was Goliath's sword.
Well, he did. You'll see that he did. And so Acimelech is in a way.
He chopped off his head with the sword.
He did, yeah. That was a big thing, wasn't it? He did it in two-handed. So yeah, I think Acimelech here is trying to justify to himself and maybe to Doeg why he gave David the sword, with one eye on the time when the day will come when he has to give din v'cheshbon in front of Shaul HaMelech. So he also says to David, and I suppose this will depend on how you say it, but the Mefarshim want us to say this as follows. Im ota tikach lecha kach. If you want it, take it. That's all I've got. There's nothing else. Ki ein acheret zulata bazeh. There's nothing else. This is all there is. So he doesn't say, here, David, this is the sword that you cut off Goliath's head. It's yours. You deserve it. You are the savior of Israel. Here, go and do the king's business with Goliath's sword. He says, you want a sword? The only sword I've got here is Goliath's sword. And he may even be saying this as a criticism. You cut his head off with it. And you know what? You brought it here. And it shouldn't even be here. It's wrapped up in a cloth and it's behind the ephod. If you want it, take it, because I've got nothing else. I admit that you can say it in all sorts of different ways, but the Mefarshim seem to indicate that there's an element of reluctance here in Acimelech. He's perhaps covering his back a little bit, knowing that Doeg is there.
Did David take it? Did David take the sword there in the first place when he mentioned in the other apostle?
We're not told that. We're told that eventually David took it to Jerusalem, but it somehow or other it made its way to the Mishkan. And maybe, if you want to say, I don't know, I haven't read this, but maybe you could say David knew it was there because he took it there. Yeah. And that's why he went there in the first place, to go and get it. Could be. I don't know.
Then he would have said, where's the sword I brought here?
Well, he could be, yeah. Or he could say, have you got a sword? Waiting to see whether Acimelech would admit to it. Don't know. All sorts of possibilities. And that's the beauty of this, because we're not told explicitly. But what appears to be the case is that Acimelech is reluctant. He's conflicted here. He's conflicted on the one hand that he wants to be loyal to the king, because I suppose that he, it's not a secret that actually what happens at the end of this story is not very good. And because he gave David the sword and the provisions. So he don't really want to do it. On the other hand, he's just been told that David's here doing the king's bidding. So that's a bit difficult. So Acimelech was in a very difficult position. And I think here he's tried to cover as many options as he possibly can. And so he says, Ein kamoha, there's no sword like that. It's nenali, give it to me. No please, no nothing, no I'd like to have it. So nenali, give it me. And off he goes. So we have here a situation now. Let's summarize. David has run away, but not very far. And he's gone to Nov, the city where the Mishkan is, And because the Mishkan is there, it is a city full of what? Priests. Correct, Michael. Kohanim. It's a city full of Kohanim. And he goes to the Acimelech, who presumably was the chief Kohen Gadol, maybe. Anyway, he was there at the time. And he asks for provisions. Acimelech is reluctant to give it him because it's holy bread, but he gives it him. He then asks for the sword, knowing that Doeg is there, seemingly. He asks for a sword, and he takes the sword of Goliath. Again, he's not given it by Acimelech. Acimelech says, I mean, you could argue that this is what Acimelech says. Well, I'm not giving it to you. If you want it, take it. That's what he says. If you wish to take it, take it. In brackets, I'm not handing it over. There it is. You want it, you go and get it. So that he can, at a later date, perhaps say, I had no choice. I didn't give it to him. He just came in and took it, perhaps. So David this does not reflect well on David. First of all, he's told a bunch of lies. You can argue that it was all pikuach nefesh. And if you argue pikuach nefesh, well, then okay, you can say that's why he told lies. That's why he ate the lechem apanim. Anita's question as to why Jonathan did not give him provisions remains. We'll come back to it. So David has lied to Acimelech, and the lies have, continue to gather pace because he lies that he's got men with him. He lies that the men are tahor. He lies that he's on the king's business. He lies that the reason that he hasn't got arms is because he left on the king's business in a hurry. And he knows Doeg is there. He knows that Doeg is going to dob him in and dob Acimelech in. So in fact, what he's doing is putting Acimelech in great danger. He's putting Acimelech in a position where he is mored b'malchut. He is rebelled against the monarchy, and he is in a position now, Acimelech, where he's in mortal danger. All because David has put him in that difficult position. And the way that the Tanakh has presented this story seems to indicate that they are not happy with the behavior of David, that this is a criticism of David's behavior. And we will see that they seem to indicate that the next bit of the story is in somehow or other some kind of punishment for David's poor behavior here. And we'll just do one more verse.
David did say to him, just as a matter of interest, said, give it to me. It's not that he didn't, he said that he didn't want to give it to him.
Yeah,
so there it is. He said, there it is, take it. But David said, no, give it to me.
Yeah, that's what he says. Yeah, but he enforced him. It's clear from Achimelech's language that he didn't want to give it to him. It was given to him reluctantly. That's right. So, verse 11. Vayakom David vayivrach vayom hahu mipnei Shaul. And David then arose and he fled before Shaul. Remember, he's only 1.8 kilometers away from Shaul at this point. He now wants to make some distance between himself and Shaul. He's only gone to Nov for one of two reasons. Either because he wanted to take sanctuary there, or / he knows that there's a sword there that he can get hold of. Goliath's sword. Now that he's got that, he's got both things. He's got provisions and he's got the sword. His next job is to put distance between himself and Shaul. Now, where does he go? Verse 11. And David arose and fled on that day from before Saul, and he came to Achish, the king of Gath. Where was Gath?
The other side of the country.
Philistine city.
By the sea on the other side.
It was towards the west, correct? And you were also correct, Johnny. It was a Philistine city. It was one of the 5 main Philistine cities. Go on. What were the others? Gath, number is 1.
Ashdod.
Ashdod.
Ashkelon.
Ashkelon, yes, Ashkelon. Azza, very good. One more.
Beersheba.
No, not Beersheba.
Bet Shemesh.
Lachish.
Beersheba.
You did very well there. 4 out of 5. That's very good. Well done. Okay.
Yeah, Johnny.
So he goes to Melech Gath. Is that not a bit weird? Well,
Yeah.
first of all, let's just have a look where it is. It is 11 hours and 25 minutes on foot. Shuafat is where we did this last week. Shuafat is Nov. And there is biblical Gath. And there's Lachish, by the way, down there. Biblical Gath has been identified as a place called hang on a minute. Tel Es Safi in Arabic and Tel Safit in Hebrew. Tel Safit, and it is over there. That is where it is. It's 55 kilometers away from Nov, and on foot, it's 11 hours and 25 minutes. If you want to go by car, it will only take you an hour and 4 minutes. But on foot, it's an 11-hour walk. There you go. That's it. So he's gone to Gath. First of all, it's far away. But why has he gone to the king of Gath? Gath is a city of the Plishtim. Goliath was a Philistine. David, after he had dealt with Goliath, what did he do?
He went and killed all the men there.
Yeah, he went and rampaged, killing Philistines. If I was David, the last place I would go would be to a Philistine city. Why did he go to a Philistine city? And I will give you a clue. It's a Sanskrit proverb from the 4th century BCE is the answer to this question. Why did he go to Achish?
My enemy's
Last
enemy.
place Saul would think he would go to.
Paul has got it. Paul is absolutely on fire today. There we go. My enemy's enemy is my friend. It's a Sanskrit proverb from the 4th century BCE, which is about the time of Avraham Avinu. But anyway, it doesn't matter where it came from.
It was either that or he got encouragement from Mr. Rothman.
From Mr. Who?
Rothman.
Stop it.
MK.
Okay, we're not going into that. We'll stick with my enemy's enemy is a friend, is my friend. That's why he went to Achish, because the Philistines' enemy was the king of Israel. Who was the king of Israel? Saul. Who's Saul's enemy? David. My enemy's enemy is my friend. So Achish was expected to say to David, "You're very welcome here because we have a common enemy, Shaul." We will stop there because we will not spoil the next story as to what goes on when he gets to Achish. But that's why he went to Achish, because my enemy's enemy is my friend. So let's just recap what we have done today before I ask you if there are any questions. We spoke about the fact that Doeg was there in the background. We showed that actually David knew that Doeg was there. We showed that the sword of Goliath was there in the Mishkan because that's what you did with trophies of war, and we gave a couple of examples of that, but it wasn't on display because swords and the temple don't go together, and we showed a source for that. So it was hidden in a garment behind the ephod. It seems that Acimelech was a bit reluctant to get involved with David, but had no choice. He was hedging his bets a bit. David lied and continued to lie, got what he wanted, which was provisions and a weapon, and then he fled to his enemy, to Achish of Gat. And next week we will see what happens next. Any questions from today?
Not a question, just one thing about Achimelech helping David. According to Targum in the art scroll, it said that ephod was the priestly garment to which the Urim and Thummim were attached. So Achimelech might have inquired from them as to whether he should help David or not.
Might have meaning should have, or might have meaning perhaps did.
And he was told to do so, it says then.
So okay.
Just given the answer.
So the Targum is saying that Achimelech was told by the Urim and Thummim
to help
give
him
the sword to David.
Mm.
I wonder, because if that was the case, when we later on see that Shaul asks Achimelech what was going on, what's the first thing that you would say if you were Achimelech? I asked God, and God told me. Well, I'll let you into a little secret. He doesn't say that to Shaul. So I'm not sure about that.
No, I'm not either, but I just thought I'd be good to tell.
Listen, who am I to disagree? I mean, I'm allowed to have my opinion, but it doesn't really count for anything. I'm not buying that right now. Maybe later on I'll buy it if something else comes up. But that smacks of a little bit of Achimelech, trying to get Achimelech out of trouble there. Although I feel for Achimelech, to be honest. He's caught between a rock and a hard place. He really is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Good. Okay, Paul, absolutely amazing today. I don't know what you were on over Shabbos, but keep on taking it. Okay, Shavua Tov, everyone. Shavua Tov.
Johnny. Thank you.
Wonderful lesson, Johnny. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Your usual typical self.
You too, Philip. Your usual typical self.
Typical is maybe the wrong word.
Shavua Tov.
Bye.